Do you have any idea how hard it was not to make some kind of Charlene Choi joke in this review?
我會老㗎，我會死㗎，我唔可以睇住你一世㗎。
媽媽。
Hi, welcome to the Silver Spleen. My name is Chris Corky Burke, and this is my review of Distinction. In the history of the Hong Kong Film Awards, only one director has ever won back-to-back Best Film honors. That director is Jivan Zhao. He had a segment in 10 Years, which won in 2016, and he also had a segment in Trevisa, which won in 2017. Distinction probably won't win Best Film of 2018 because it's not that kind of film, but it is the kind of film that a lot of people need to see. In fact, some people should be forced to watch it. Distinction tells several stories, all of which are centered around a special education needs school in Fanling. Some of the teachers don't want to be there, some of the parents want their kids to go to school elsewhere, and the kids from other schools who are working with these students, voluntarily or otherwise, would rather be anywhere else. Luckily for the viewer, this isn't a setup for a bright, shining ending where love, decency, and hard work prevail. There's no third act joygasm. Now, I hope that doesn't scare you off watching Distinction, because it shouldn't. Distinction tells an important story, and tells it well because it's real, it's true, and it doesn't look away when you want it to. Distinction isn't what I would call a cinematic film. It's more interested in letting the visuals tell a story than make an impression, but that doesn't mean that it's not a great-looking film. It is. The cinematography is definitely noteworthy, especially because it walks a fine line between documentary and dramatic. But so does the rest of the movie. The simplest way for me to explain how good a movie this is to tell you that I didn't take very many notes while I was watching it. I was really caught up in the story, which I can tell you is not always the case. As I watched it, I kept asking myself, how can an educational system care so little about the students that it's supposed to take care of? Not just the special needs kids either, I'm talking about all of the students. Hong Kong schools use what's called a band system to rank their schools. They used to have 5 bands, but they cut it down to 3 to try and curtail some of the stigmatizing. You know, it was either that or improve the lower half of the school system, so you can see why they made that choice. Now we have 3 bands in Hong Kong, and the easiest way to describe them is that Band 1 would be Dead Poets Society, Band 2 would be The Breakfast Club, and Band 3 would be Dangerous Minds. Well, Dangerous Minds and Forrest Gump, because in Hong Kong these special needs schools sometimes end up being Band 3 schools. Hong Kong's education secretary, you know, the person in charge of all this, has kids, so you'd think that, you know, he had a vested interest in making sure that the educational system was serving the population it's supposed to. But his kids go to an international school. I mean, you know, he's rich, it's just what you do in Hong Kong. His predecessor was the guy that said students commit suicide not because of all the pressure they're under, but because they have poor life planning skills. Now, this is also the same guy that spent 400,000 Hong Kong taxpayer dollars on an 8-day trip to Peru in the United States. So if anybody knows about poor life planning skills, it's him. Now, those facts/insults are important because I want you to have at least some of the local context for this film. You can follow the story no matter where you're from, but if you're familiar with Hong Kong and especially with its educational system, the movie's gonna hit you a lot harder. Jivan Zhao is one of those directors whose confidence and assurance in directing really come through in his films. I thought of Distinction kind of like an An Hui film in subject terms, but it was just more accessible in the way it presented itself. One thing I really admire about Distinction is how vividly and honestly it captures the people and places of Hong Kong. An awful lot of people live the lives that were shown in this film. We see these people respond to the pressures of their lives the way real people sometimes do. Imperfectly, immaturely, and unintelligently, even if they have the best of intentions. What I really appreciated in this movie were the small touches that made it so real. What might have been a pivotal family moment in the hallway of a public housing estate gets very realistically ruined by nosy-ass neighbors who not only open the door to see what's going on, but then stand there not 3 feet away gawping at them the whole time. You know, it's hard enough to deal with the irrational social stigma placed on developmentally disabled people in Hong Kong. Now add to that people shamelessly videoing your son's very public meltdown on a sidewalk. I love Hong Kong, I really do. Some of the people I could do without. Do expensive schools automatically produce good, smart, compassionate young people? Not always. Some of them are just vindictive, selfish garbage, like their parents, I guess. You ever heard of parallel trading? It's a very Hong Kong term that the government here likes to trot out because smuggling, like the rest of the planet call it, sounds so illegal. You know, like something the government is expected to do something about. Besides, it keeps those people busy so that they have less time and energy to think about the future that they can't and don't have. Win-win, ma. There's a subplot in Distinction whose end result is very, very easy to see coming, but at the same time, it's what happens in real life. You know, sometimes real life is like a movie. But I really enjoyed the way that one of the characters in that subplot responds to the situation. There was something about it that I just found really nice. And in the context of the stories in this movie, nice is about as good as it ever gets. When the final performance takes place in the film, I actually kind of admired the fact that the auditorium is nowhere near full. Now, I'm a terribly crass person, let's face it. But the simple truth is that outside of the families of these developmentally disabled kids, nobody really gives a shit about them, and they're just not interested. And I admired the film for at least being honest about that. One reason the film works so well is the very, very strong performances of the cast. Jo Koo plays a dedicated teacher who has a few personal issues to work out. Sham Ka-ki plays a Band 3 miscreant who's working off community service at the school, because it's either that or get thrown out of his own school. His performance really made an impression on me because I spent some time teaching in a Band 3 school, and he really nails that portrayal. It's hard to believe in yourself when absolutely no one else does. Speaking of which, Jennifer Yu's performance is also very impressive. She plays a young woman from an elite school trying to buff her university applications with extracurricular volunteer work that's guaranteed to give her an edge. She spends the entire movie walking around as an open emotional wound. And like I said before, there's no Band-Aid in the third act. It had to be an emotionally taxing role, but Jennifer Yu plays it really, really well. It may come off sometimes as kind of flat and blank, but that's what happens to a lot of local kids. You know, it may have something to do with growing up in a city and an educational system that has admissions interviews for kindergartens. I'm not kidding. Now, each of these characters gets fleshed out in some detail, and we get to know them through what they say and do. But we also get to know them through their interactions with the other cast members. So many people turn in memorable performances in this movie that it's hard to list all of them. Eric Kwok does it with a single expression. Dominic Lam does it by inhabiting a character with frightening accuracy. Cecilia Yip does it by just being terrifying. I wanted to kick that character down the stairs. Fish Liu has a non-speaking role that reinforces my already immense respect for her as an actress. It's the kind of role that's not easy to do, and certainly not easy to do well. The only easy thing would have been to do it badly, and we've all seen people do that before. I also want to mention Chung Man-ti, who plays a small role, but does it really well. I also have to mention Tae Ka-long, a young kid with no acting experience and some additional challenges. He punches way above his weight, and even I can admit that if this kid gets a nomination for Best New Performer, it would be a nice piece of life-reflecting art. Now, let's face it, I'm a lot more comfortable dumping on movies than having to try and say nice things about them. I'm so emotionally constipated that it's a health risk. So movies like this are a real challenge for me. The most honest thing I can say about it is it's really too good for someone like me to be talking about. I really enjoyed Distinction, even though it's not necessarily an enjoyable story. It's a very well-made film and it tells a very important story, but it's not necessarily easy to sit through, especially, as I said, if you know anything at all about the education system here. But I definitely recommend that people go and see it. It's an incredibly local film, but it also travels really, really well. I hope a lot of people see this movie because it deserves to be seen. Like I always say, if we don't support the movies that deserve it, then we get the movies we deserve. So please, go watch this in the cinema. If you can't do it that way, wait till you can buy or rent a copy. Don't steal this or any other movie. If you enjoyed my review, please let me know. And if you didn't, please let me know. If you enjoy the channel, please subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again soon.